Hey Sacha, how are you doing today? It's great to have you
Uh,
here today.
Beautiful day.
Yes, yes, I can't agree more. Look, to start with, I would love to get a little bit of background about yourself. How do you got started and how do you get here? You are an expert in credit and collections. So we would love to hear your backstory.
No worries. I feel like I say this one quite often. My name is Sacha Close. I've been in Australia for over 20 years and I really focus on Kiros moments. So to me, those are the moments where credit providers can change the way that they interact with their customers. The key ones for me, so Kiros moments is kind of a changing moment. And the ones that I like to focus on are origination, so credit originations, collections, vulnerability, hardship, and complaints. My key one has always been in collections, and I've been really fortunate over the last over 20 years for me to be able to work in very senior executive roles, both within the bank, but also within the bureaus. I've worked at two out of the three bureaus, credit bureaus, and a bunch of software suppliers. So my key drivers, my passion is really in data and technology and the ability to use that to reduce friction in order for people to be able to really engage with pure, strong conversations with their customers in the moments that really matter. So I've been fortunate to do that. And now I own my own software credit risk and collections consulting business named Sakija.
Wow, great to hear that. And I know you see there's a lot of stuff changing right now. Technology is changing so fast. Regulations are changing so fast. So there's so much change happening. As an industry thought leader in collections, what do you see as the top three challenges for the industry is facing right now?
That's a great question. I think there's been some phenomenal speed of change. I mean, you're definitely leading in the front of that from a technology and an AI and a data point. But we're also seeing quite an interesting shift in consumers and the way that customers expect to be treated and the way that they want this environment to be without friction and to just be simpler and easier. So we definitely saw coming out of COVID a real big change in people who had never been in collections, who are now coming into collections departments in order to get hardship programs that were offered through COVID, and that changed the general cohort of customers that come through, and that also changed people's expectations. We're seeing a big shift in people's expectations. The other one that I think we've seen a big shift into is consumers being comfortable with digital and to being comfortable with having more information on them. It's a funny balance. It's a really delicate balance between expecting your businesses and your partners and your companies to know you and to help you without being, creepy, basically. So they expect us to know a lot more. So the friction's definitely wanting to not be there on that. I think probably the only other real change is that shift that we're really seeing in the economy where people are really financially struggling. And there's a lot of discussion about financial stress and vulnerability out there. And unfortunately, it's not going to be solved the same way we solved COVID. And so there's going to have to be a higher drive for us to actually collect and to come up with solutions that work, that are strong for both the credit provider, the business, but also the customer.
Yes, I think I've seen ASIC and all the regulators are emphasizing a lot on the financial inclusivity. With this growing trend on financial hardship, do you think the industry is doing enough to support the customers who need that extra help?
Absolutely not. I think there's so much more we can do. I think back to the days that we first started to discuss the word hardship, and that was over 10 years ago. I was at the bank, one of the biggest banks in Australia, consulting there when they introduced me to their first hardship manager, and she had three staff. Like that was leading edge, but that was a long time ago. And since then, we've had these teams. We've been dealing with vulnerable customers for quite a long time. And we're not necessarily getting better. I think financial education and literacy in the population is lower and people's resilience is lower. And so we need to do better. Also, I think one of the challenges that I've seen from a technology point of view and this is something you and I talk about all the time, is that ability to help our staff and our employees do a better job. And I've watched these guys in some of the biggest banks in Australia, having really hard, empathetic, compassionate conversations with customers, while at the same time copy and pasting from 5 different systems, trying to figure out what the latest program they can do is, trying to figure out what this customer's accounts are, writing it all into a piece of paper or a notepad or a calculator to put it into the programs, and then having to load it into 5, 6, 7 systems after that. And there's obviously been some big banks that have failed in that process in the news recently. It's too much. There's just too much manual processing and too much friction that we're putting into the businesses that are making the teams have a harder time, and it means they can't have as good of a conversation and really listen and empathize with our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the data silos, the process gaps. I know the technology is already here, and generative AI is definitely the buzzword right now. It's a new industry revolution, and we're seeing a lot of momentum and transformation that's happening. It's about to kick off. So, what are the top opportunities that you see with respect to AI or generative AI? Do you see that's going to really help the industry to transform itself?
I've seen so much progress in the earlier stages of collections. And the real disappointing part is that collections, we used to say it's a poor cousin. We were often at the other end of the funding and lots of money going into originations and customer experiences. And I've worked with teams that are customer experience teams that even didn't even know they had a collections department in their business. And you think about it and you think, well, that's the most important time for us to show up to our customers. That's when they're at their hardest time. That's where they're feeling the most vulnerable. And yet we in the industry haven't invested, I don't think, as much as we could into that. And we see that when you can do what we call straight through processing. So you can find all my information in order to give me a loan without talking to me. But suddenly when I'm having a hard time and I can't pay my bills, I'm shifted back to like 1980s, and you're asking me to fax you in a doctor's letter from my notes and what is my income and expenditure. You're going, you knew all of that. You knew
Yeah.
it enough for you to give me this loan. So now all of a sudden I'm having to put it in, and it's frustrating for the employees. It's frustrating for the customers. Whereas that data's there, like you said, it's available. And so I think we're not making use of that. I don't think as an industry we're using enough to go across to our engagements and our conversations with customers, and really looking at that and looking at how we can really improve and help our team in those conversations. And I think the other one that I really see as an opportunity is we're not doing enough to provide the options to our staff. So if you think about it, some of these ones, especially when we were hitting in the COVID days, you would get different treatments based off your postal code.
Mhm.
We could have had hundreds and hundreds of those. And so the collector was always trying to figure out what we could give you and what we couldn't give you.
Yeah.
And it became so hard that we couldn't automate a lot of that. That's stuff that you could have easily used, you know, but generative AI and some better processing to move that through. So it could give me the options. It could say, I already know who you are. This is your top 3 options that are available to this customer
Yeah.
today, and the impacts.
Yeah, I think one of the trend that I'm seeing is for omni-channel customer engagement or omni-channel custom collection process. A lot of these things are now getting automated. So means a person is not really calling to collect. So those phone calls are not there. There's a lot of automation happening, automated collection. So what do you see as a plus point or downside of AI driven automated collection? What's the right balance? Where how much should be done technology versus a human should be in the loop?
That's a great one. I love the idea of the balance, and the word you used is perfect there. It's balance. And quite often in collections we talk about the art and the science of collections. And so the science of collections is very much automation. It's very much models. It's very much right customer engagement. It's very much predictive on who should be paying, who is our highest risk. And we need that because collections is very regulated and it's also very process driven. And so the more we can automate that and the more we can take those manual requirements off of our staff, the better. They shouldn't have to be doing any of that kind of stuff. We should be able to provide it. And then you really get into the art of collections. And collections is very much a customer connection. And so not every customer needs this engagement, and different customers have different preferences. So you need to kind of model around that. But when you are engaging with a customer, it's about having that energy and that dynamics and that empathy to be able to actually engage with them in an authentic way. When you're trying to get people to engage in an authentic way, you need to remove the technology barriers that are stopping them from having that. I shouldn't have 7 screens open trying to figure out what your accounts look like.
Yeah,
I should just be able to listen. And I think that's the other difference also is that there's been a big fear to being able to adjust digital conversations and digital interactions because it is so regulated and everybody's so fearful. And so I mean, it's extraordinarily painful in collections to change a letter, for gosh sakes, without having 53 lawyers review it. So the idea of having dynamic customer driven conversations is really quite scary for a lot of people because they want everything in its little box and quite legislated. But I think that's where the benefit is if you can go through the language and you can go through all of the interactions, you can really fine tune that and make
yeah.
sure that we are making the right choices and the right conversations for them in in all our channels, whether
Yeah.
it's a collector channel or an automated channel.
But you agree that there should be a human involved or design as part of that process. The human in the loop should be an essence, right? So they need to step in where.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think uh, we've watched a lot of technology without domain expertise fail.
Mhm.
And so you need to have that domain expertise and that human interaction, but also you should at any time be able to escalate in and out of channels. So I could be in a digital channel and be quite happy and want to move out of that digital channel at any time.
Yeah,
And so I think there always needs human insight. And I think the idea is that we co-pilot
yeah.
our people and we support our staff so that they can do the best job that they can. And we take off the stuff that manual stuff they don't need to be doing. That's pretty much
Absolutely.
the ideal.
Yeah, and I think with one thing is AI has a lot of bias. Sometimes when you are looking for financial inclusivity, trying to judge if someone is really vulnerable, AI can make mistakes or biased. So that can impact how you're treating that customer, and that individualistic approach is so important when you are work doing this collection, which is a very sensitive process, right? So
100%. And I talk quite a lot on to different programmers that are trying to build out the AI on that because a vulnerability indicator is
mm,
exactly that. It's an indication that I might have a vulnerability, but it doesn't lead to necessarily, we have to be very careful that doesn't put a flag on me that I am a vulnerable person. I have
yeah,
indications that are vulnerable. And so we need to be able to realize that that's how the process works. The other thing
mhm,
that we need to realize is we're dealing with people. And so the fact that your data might be indicating to me one thing, I don't have any right to set you into a different path or to, to kind of help you without talking to you because you might not want
yeah,
that help. And so it's critical that we have people that are engaged in these processes that
mhm,
really kind of take it away from being a technology solution, but take it
yeah.
into being a human led, you know, designed solution.
Yeah, and I think one thing around customer conversations, customer complaint, uh, there's a lot of insight around it. So how collections and credit risks should be effectively utilizing this data point to drive better decision making process around it.
Completely correct. And some of it is just so much data. Like there's just so much data that's in, especially in the complaint section. But your complaints is your window to your customer soul. Like if they're bothering to make a complaint, then they're giving you all of the insight that you need. So the fact that for many years we ignored it, or it wasn't linked, is in retrospect now almost ludicrous, because it just provides so much information. And a really good example of that is we did a lot of work with the complaints that were coming in when we were dealing with COVID. And one of the things we never realized, because most people who would ever come in for hardship were already in our collections ecosystem. They'd been in and out of collections. So they were used to the tone of letters, which is actually quite legal and quite distant. It's not very empathetic, to say the least, and it's very consequence based. And we hadn't realized how that impacted customers who had never experienced that. They were just calling up because they had listened on the news, and they were worried about something, or, COVID was impacting them. All these new customers who had come in brought in a whole different lens. And so as we went through the complaints data, we realized that was there, which we hadn't known, which fundamentally changed a whole bunch of, we changed 450 different communication channels out to change the tone. So I think that's critical. I think it's really important to see. It also shows you where you're falling down. I mean, complaints is where something didn't go the way we expected it to. And there's always unexpected consequences. If you have to have a feedback loop, especially the more you automate things.
Absolutely, I can't agree more. I could not help but notice that you are leading Women in Credit Risk, which is I guess, a non-profit that you started. Would love to hear a little bit more about what was kind of the backstory around it, how did it got started, and what is your vision for this group?
Wonderful. Women in Credit Risk is definitely very close to my heart. It's Women in Credit Risk in Collections now. We rebranded at the beginning of last year to come in for the ironic part of collections, which I left off there. It originally started as really a grassroots networking group. Women have been probably underrepresented within this industry, and you'll see that often. You think within data science, you see it within technology. We're a little bit stronger in the collection space than we were in the credit risk and originations space, and some of that in the modeling space, the data analytics space. But we're still quite underrepresented. Yeah, this kind of started ironically in as early as 2018, where I tend to know most of the females in the industry, but they didn't know each other. And I thought that was really disappointing. We needed to get a chance. There's not that many of us. We should absolutely know each other. And so it really triggered with just us convinced to go out for a night out for a drink, and got a budget and went to have some cocktails. And it really is meant to be kind of a once off, but it just kept growing and people kept asking for it. And so we got to a peak just before COVID of over 200 women in Melbourne that would come and go out of our sessions, out of our events, and 150 in Sydney, and lots that were kind of following along or trying to come in when they can. It obviously got paused at COVID. And then when we went to come back out of COVID, I was amazed on how many people had contacted me and said, can we get back on? Can we start having these? I feel disconnected and really need that community now. It was a lot more important. And as we started to reinvigorate the events, one of the other things that came out of some of our younger members is that request for them to have education. We're not seeing as many conferences, or we weren't right after COVID, and there wasn't as way for them to connect to the other people in the industry, but also we weren't seeing anywhere you could get, credit risk 101 or collections or help with Basel models or whatever it was, when you just wanted to call somebody and ask them for help on that or mentorship. And so when we've relaunched Women in Credit Risk and Collections, that's one of our key focuses. One is about purpose. So we do a lot of volunteer work to support other women in financial situations, whether it's financial education or financial stress. And we do a lot more policy work internally. So we talk a lot more about making sure we're at the table. And if you're at the table as a female, how do you make sure that we're getting that seen? We do some policy work, and we've done a bit of work with some teams on, gender bias in AI. Speaking of, like you said, AI can make mistakes, and we found that there was some gender bias even right into the previous credit bureau models that were biased against females. And we do it as a networking group.
Yeah.
So a good chance for us to get to know each other.
Absolutely. I think people working remotely, I think that personal touch point is so critical, and you do want to learn from others, right? So, best practices, what's going on in terms of policies changes and technology. That's the big change that's happening. It's disrupting everything that's we're working towards. So, in terms of generative AI, which is really transforming the industry. How do you see that credit and collection professionals adopt to this change? How should they see this technology?
One of the things that I think I'd really like to see more of, and I mean, we're seeing this, we've been getting better, but we've seen it all the way through time, is that when in certain industries where women are underrepresented, the biases just continue to grow. Unfortunately, if a voice isn't at the table, it tends to never get heard.
Yes.
So one of the things that we're really trying to encourage with our female members is the fact that you can be part of the generative AI movement without necessarily having to understand how the technology works. There's a lot of people that are really great with the technology. It's the domain knowledge that I think is the key, and that gives us the power to kind of step in. And I've got quite a few female friends that are really senior leaders now in technology programs that didn't have a background in technology and felt quite uncomfortable even trying to be in that technology space.
Yeah.
But they're in there because they understand the domain knowledge. The collections and credit risk is quite niche.
Hmm.
And so it's quite a bit about how do you make this technology work for us? Because there's a lot of instances this technology has been rolled out. We've all seen a web chat. We've all seen one of these programs that's, something that's come out,
Yeah.
a model that's been built that just doesn't answer what we were trying to get to.
Yeah.
And so I think for us, it's really about feeling confident to one, if you want to get in the technology, absolutely,
Hmm.
charge ahead. I think that's the best thing ever. Most of our members are data scientists anyway, so they're,
Yeah.
they're leading into that part. So they love that, and they're helping us, kind of the rest of us, follow along. I've always been driving data and technology, so for me, it's a big passion. But I think, one of the biggest ones is just really challenging people to think about how they can use this domain knowledge
Hmm.
to bridge that so that the technology is solving a problem, which is the
Yeah.
key, isn't it?
So I think what you're recommending is to lead the change, not resist the change, but the changes ought to happen, but just lead the change. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes, I mean, what I find is our members tend to be worried they've got too much to do. And
Hmm.
so it's like, oh, one more thing I need to learn. But
Yeah.
you do need to learn. It's important and it helps. And so I think the benefit we have for some of them is that it's actually quite easy to use.
Hmm.
And that's the key. You can participate without needing a full programming degree. That being said, a lot of my girls have R programming and art different languages they're already working on. But it's about finding that time, isn't it? And we all need to find the time to self-develop.
I think on the topic of learning, I know you have a data scientist in your house, but uh, what's your like a top three tips for how do they sort of go about learning generative AI? Do they enroll for a course in the university, or how do they learn? Like, what's your like top three tips? Or they go to ChatGPT, try some prompts, or think about a new way how they can how collection can be used with AI. Or what's that three tips that you would recommend?
Great answer. Yes, I do have a 19-year-old uni student who is currently employed with us at Sakija doing some data science work. A lot of what the team's been doing with him, which has been fantastic, is helping him understand models. So I've got quite a few friends and contacts that build predictive models. So he's been learning through that. Interestingly, he doesn't seem that interested in ChatGTP. They've been testing it with complex math questions that they're doing at uni, and so he's not as happy with that. But I have been using it with him to really help him kind of understand the business problem. And so I think that's what we've been trying to get him to be really more focused on, is to understand how would we use this? What do we need it for? But I do have a list of things that I have put on his to-do list that I want him to learn and to build, because they're just picking it up so quickly, aren't they?
Yes,
And there's so many different portals and plugins and stuff like that that they can use on it. But what I want him to challenge himself on, I guess, is more of the ethics behind it and the trust. How do you trust it? And so, how do you make sure that it's being fed with the right information? And then we talk a lot about biases. So we do a lot of work with him on, just asking him to challenge himself on what biases could be in that are coming out.
yes, yes. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Sacha, for all this knowledge and insight. I think would love to connect again in a couple of weeks' time just to understand what's happening in your world. But thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge and insight today.
Well, thank you. I'm really enjoying the work that you guys are doing with the generative AI, and really helping lead that in the industry. So happy to partner with you.
Thank you so much.